Okay, so habitat destruction is what we're going to be looking at next. So there's another great quote here from the WWF page, and it says, "Habitat loss is probably the greatest threat to the variety of life on this planet today. It is identified as a main threat to 85% of all species described in the IUCN's Red List, so those species who are officially classified as threatened or endangered." And I mean, that's quite telling. 85% of all those that are endangered it is due to habitat loss. So climate change and habitat loss are interlinked. Climate change can cause habitat loss, for example, increased temperatures and change in precipitation can affect plant species by decreasing the amount of water available. This can then cause a decline in plant species, would affect organisms that depend on those plants for food and shelter. So with all the kind of weather patterns that are changing, the alteration in the weather patterns and the climate in those areas will alter what species will thrive there. Another example, of course, are polar bears, and that's a very obvious one. Climate change is causing an increase in temperatures, which is causing a decrease in the amount of polar ice, which is obviously diminishing the polar habitat for the polar bears. Habitat loss can also contribute to climate change, so human processes such as agriculture expansion can cause habitat destruction and contribute to climate change due to increased greenhouse gas production. So the pictures taken below are from NASA's Images of Change website, and it's really interesting. So you've got deforestation in Paraguay, so the left is 1973, and that is 2008. So that is quite the difference. You're seeing a huge cutback in forest. The agricultural growth, so this is again Paraguay, so this is 1977, and this is 2008. So I mean, that's a huge increase in agricultural growth. So there are two examples there that are probably interlinked with deforestation and agricultural growth. So here's a case study. So we're going to have a look at some case studies. I find this is a better way to kind of try and understand the impacts is by looking at real life examples. So we're going to look at the Atlantic forest. So where is the Atlantic forest? It runs through Brazil, Paraguay and Argentina. And why is it important? It is second only to the Amazon in terms of ecological diversity and is more endangered. Only 7 to 12% of the Atlantic forest is left intact by 2% of its primary forest. And primary forest is undisturbed by human activity. And what's left is highly fragmented. And obviously that's a huge problem for genetic diversity. If you remember, fragmenting populations can cause a bottleneck. So who lives there? About 2,200 species of birds, mammals, reptiles and amphibians. That's 5% of Earth's vertebrates. 148 of those vertebrate species are on the IUCN's Red List, and 104 of those are endemic. So endemic means they are only found there. So if they die out there, they don't exist anymore, they are extinct. More species are found here than in all of Europe. There are over 200 bird species that are endemic, again found only there, and a third of freshwater fish found here are endemic too. There is a massive primate diversity with 26 species and 21 of which are endemic. So again, you wipe out that forest and you will wipe out 21 species of endemic primates. About 20,000 species of plant, 8,000 of which are endemic to the area, not found anywhere else again, and that's 8% of all plants on Earth. So this is a huge source of biodiversity that is under threat. So what's the cause of habitat loss? And before we go into that, I'd just like to show you this. So this is a public domain image found on Wikimedia, and this is deforestation. So this was previously all covered with forest and this is now removed. So this is a great visualization of the deforestation process. So it began with European settlers clearing the forest for timber cattle ranches and to grow sugarcane, coffee and cocoa. More recent threats include the clearance of forest for soy cultivation, pine and eucalyptus plantations, firewood harvesting, road building, expansion of urban areas, plant collections and illegal logging. So river systems are also threatened by pollution, drainage and dam construction. There is also the threat of invasive species, and there's obviously the secondary issues that come along, which are soil erosion and loss of soil fertility caused by deforestation. So all of these threats could cause a further loss in biodiversity as well as further fragmentation. And fragmentation is of course a danger to fragmentation is also a danger to genetic biodiversity as populations become isolated from one another. So this picture here shows it well. This is the fragmentation of the Atlantic forest. So all of the species that are fragmented and separated by human developments can no longer interbreed, which can obviously, as we've already discussed, decrease their fitness as a population. So my conclusion for this is that the Atlantic forest is threatened by many different factors. There is no easy one fix. The continued deforestation is a danger to ecological and genetic diversity of its inhabitants. So as a bit of extra work, research how organisations such as WWF and the Nature Conservancy are helping conserve the biodiversity of the Atlantic forest. There are, of course, other websites to look at. There are a load of fantastic conservation charities and websites out there to look at. Those are the first two that just kind of jumped to my head. So often, when we think of biodiversity endangered or extinct, we'll often think of an animal of some kind we've seen that is in danger of going extinct, and probably a fluffy one at that. But what about the rest of life? Bacteria, fungi, protists, and plants? Where do you think the majority of our medicines come from? And what are the odds of the potential medicinal species of plants will go extinct before we find them? So this is a case study. So this is the Himalayan and Pacific yew. Excuse me. So this is the IUCN status of the Himalayan yew, and it's classed as endangered. There's a loss of over 50% in 25 to 30 years. The Pacific yew is near threatened. Why are they important? Both the Pacific and Himalayan yew contain Taxol on their leaves and bark. Taxol is used in chemotherapy in the form of paclitaxel. It treats ovarian, breast, lung, pancreatic, and other cancers. Now, the cause of their decline is overexploitation for Taxol and deforestation for the Himalayan yew, and for the Pacific yew, also overexploitation, but also logging. Now, the future of this is actually quite bright. Taxol can now be synthesised synthetically, and obviously that's fantastic because it means we can stop harvesting and potentially destroying the plants that we have left with the finite reserves that we had. We can now synthesise it synthetically, which is fantastic. But just take a think of how likely it is that there are species out there in these kind of fragmented and unexplored parts of the world that are endangered due to habitat loss, that there might be species of plants out there that we still haven't discovered their medicinal properties, and we are losing them at an alarming rate. Here's another one for you, the Hungarian hawthorn. So their class is endangered. They've got over a 50% reduction in population in the last 30 years. They were only vulnerable in 2013. It's only endemic to Central Eastern Europe, and that's here. So they are actually extinct in these areas here, and this is their extinct range. But why is it important? So recently, a scientific paper demonstrated that it has medicinal properties. It's been shown to have antioxidant, so it prevents delay cell damage, and anxiolytic, anti-anxiety properties. It's in danger of going extinct before we can study it further and potentially make use of its medicinal properties. And what's the cause of decline? Again, primarily habitat destruction, forest clearance, industrialisation, and the development of plantations. Other factors, of course, include grazing by animals and declining groundwater levels. This is another example of a potentially medicinal species going extinct or potentially having a massive genetic diversity loss before we've even began to really discover what it's capable of. It's clear that the planet's ecological biodiversity is declining, which causes genetic biodiversity to decline as well. Climate change and habitat destruction are two of the biggest threats to biodiversity, and some scientific studies have named this the Holocene extinction event. Others have also named it the anthropogenic extinction event. They're exactly the same, and if they get their way, it will be a new geological period, and it will be called the Anthropocene, and it will begin in the Industrial Revolution. It's called an extinction event because current extinction levels are many times that of background extinction levels. So organisms have a choice: adapt, move, or die, and unfortunately it seems like many of them are dying out.